You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike. Welcome into the Psych with Mike library.
Sorry.
This is Dr. Michael Mahan.
Now I'm ready.
Watching videos with Mr. Brett Newcomb.
Well, it was a video of Otto Kernberg's presentation on emotional information.
So I sent you, and now in retrospect, looking back on it.
Which is what retrospect means.
Yeah, I probably could have included some additional information, but I sent you a video of Otto Kernberg because this was a video that had been recorded in late 2022, and it was of Otto Kernberg, who is still alive. Yeah. And I was like,
he appeared to be. He was moving.
Who knew that Otto Kernberg? I think of Otto Kernberg as this guy who lived in the 40s and 50s and was one of the pioneers of the psychodynamic approach. And it never occurred to me that he was still alive. I mean, Bandura, Alfred Adler, Jung, Heinz Kohut, who I love and base essentially my entire understanding of how human emotional development, how human emotional regulation develops, was born in 1913, died in 1981, and here Otto Kernberg is still chugging along.
Yeah.
So, born in 1928. 95 years old.
Germany? Austria? I think he grew up in Germany, then he moved to Chile, and then he moved to England.
Because the family...
Then he moved to America.
Right, so when they were fleeing, they got out of... Because I wanted to say they were in Vienna, but I don't think I think they were in Germany.
That would be Austria.
And they fled...
Which at that time was also Germany.
And went to Chile, obviously fleeing the Nazi occupation and being deported into a concentration camp. But yeah, that's quite a life.
Yeah.
And still around and still vibrant.
Seminal.
Yeah.
In the understanding of his importance of his work.
Right. So
what was his work, Michael?
Well, I was going to say you have had more experience, obviously, with Otto Kernberg.
Because I'm older?
No, because you've studied with him. So tell us a little bit about what your experience with.
So 27 years ago, my wife and I and a psychologist colleague that I worked with went to a summer program at Yeshiva University on Cape Cod. And the primary presenter at this week-long seminar on personality disorders was Otto Kernberg. Mm-hmm. Kernberg is one of the two seminal sources to our understanding of personality disorders. One is Kernberg, one is Masterson. So I had an opportunity to study, to attend, to listen to Kernberg and his wife, who was a psychologist, and he's a psychiatrist, in their team approach to working with clinically severe personality disorder people who were institutionalized. Mm-hmm. But the thing that I most remember about those conversations and our dialogue back at the hotel and for weeks afterwards as we tried to process and understand what we were being taught was a distinction in the understanding, the evaluation of suicidal ideation and suicidal presentation by clients with different diagnostic labels. So if you have the average client, whatever that means.
Yeah, whatever that means.
Who says to you, I am suicidal. There's an approach for understanding and there's an approach for responding that you're supposed to have. Mm-hmm. For questioning how serious, how severe is this intentionality? How close are you to the edge? And there are evaluation systems. I've had a couple of courses where that's what we studied, is intervening with suicidal ideation. Mm-hmm. And so there are books to be read, there are workshops to go to. They want to train you because it's a fairly common experience in doing psychotherapy to have somebody say, "I'll just kill myself. I have no value. I have no worth. I hurt too much. Life is not worth it." Or, which is more common with adolescents, when an adolescent says, "I'm suicidal," very frequently what they mean is, "I'll kill myself and then you'll be sorry."
Right.
For what you've done to me or not given me or however you've treated me.
So can I go off on a tangent just
please.
a second?
Absolutely.
So I would be really interested in hearing your feedback, because I don't know that you and I have ever had this specific conversation, so I will be actually very interested in hearing your feedback. But one of the things that I always say to clients is, you can tell me you want to kill yourself. I'm not going to freak out. I'm not going to overreact. I think sometimes people freak out and they overreact, and they say, okay, well, now I got to call the hospital and you got to go and get, what I say to them is, the point at which I ask you the question, are you ready to do that? Do you have a plan? And do you have the means to execute that plan?
There's a whole list of protocols.
Then I'm going to act on it. But if you just say offhandedly, as people are wont to do, I feel like dying.
Yeah.
I'm not going to freak out about that. That's a human, I told a client this not too long ago, and he was a young man, and he said it changed his life. But I told him, you don't have to be afraid of the things that you think. Every single human being has at one point in their life had every single thought that every human being can have. And the only difference is that most people don't admit it. It's okay to have dark thoughts. It's okay to have thoughts of suicide. Everybody has thought that. Anybody who says, I've never contemplated suicide, is lying. Everybody's at least had that idea pop into their head. I mean, I don't think you could live a natural human life and not have that happen. What ends up being a situation where we have to intervene is when the individual feels that, and they have a plan, and they have the means to carry it out, then that is an imminent, an emergent situation that we have to intervene in. Otherwise, I think we need to process it, and I think that even normalizing it is really helpful for people. Would you agree?
For the most part. I've had situations where I've had to call police in a community
absolutely,
and send them to someone's home because I thought they were suicidal and at risk, and wait on the phone while they managed to get into the house and secure the individual and make sure they were safe. Mm-hmm. And they were at risk. It took them straight to the hospital.
Yeah.
But I was talking about Kernberg, and Kernberg was saying there are differences depending on the severity of the personality disorder that a client may be suffering from. And if they are suffering from what we call the axis 2 personality disorders, borderline, narcissistic,
conversion
bipolar,
disorders,
all that, hysteria, histrionic, if they're suffering
and
from...
just for clarification, bipolar is axis 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
If they are... Where am I going with this? If they have that diagnostic label and they come in and they say to you, I'm suicidal, or actually they don't come in and say that, which goes back to the conversation that you were having. What happens is you get a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning. I remember having a client that called me at 2 o'clock in the morning and said, I just called to say goodbye. I've killed myself.
Which is ironic since they were on the phone.
Well, I said, what have you done? Well, I've taken all the pills in the house, and I'm going to die because I've taken all the pills in the house. Where are you? Are you home? I'm not going to tell you. That kind of stuff. Kernberg says that is an operation that comes out of borderline personality disorder. And that the way that you treat that clinically is once you understand that's what you're dealing with, you say to the client, if you ever put me in a position where I have to save your life, where I have to act to send the police to your home or the ambulance or get somebody there to get you hospitalized as a way to save your life, I will do it. But then I will not see you again. That will end our relationship. If you want to come in and talk to me personally about your need and feeling and desire to take this radical step, you can do that, and I won't overreact. Same thing that you're saying. I will listen to you. I will accept the normality of much of what you're saying. We'll make an assessment. We'll develop a treatment plan. One of the ethical things that you have to do is you have to get a contract with them or from them, an expressly stated contract of I won't attempt actively or indirectly to harm myself between now and X date. And then as a clinician, you get that contract, you have to follow up on it. Because if you don't ask them about it the next time you see them, how did you do with that? They subconsciously understand they're not bound by the contract anymore. So each time you have them come in, you have them renew the contract, specifically, explicitly, in all of its detail, whatever it is. And you document that. Because ethically, you are not required under the law to keep them from killing themselves.
Right.
You are ethically required to be able to demonstrate that you followed the standard treatment protocols. And that means you have to have notes. We had this conversation. I got this contract. I asked, do you have a gun? Do you have a knife? Or, what's your plan? You're going to use a rope? Take pills? What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? How elaborate and scripted is your plan? So if you haven't developed the notes that document you had that conversation, then you could also be in trouble, irrespective of whether this person attempted to harm themselves or not. So Kernberg was saying that again, poor descriptors, in ordinary usage, as a clinician, you're going to encounter these conversations. You're going to encounter people that say, I would be better off, my family would be better off, but the world would be better if I weren't here. And those are legitimate venues for conversation and therapy. How does that feel to feel that way? How long have you felt this way? Is there something more immediately happened that has triggered your, are you being, is this a self-critical judgment? Are you punishing yourself for some failing that perhaps you don't understand fully? Could we discuss that? What did you do? What did you say? Because how does that loop back into your self descriptors of your own value? Which
is the point. So for me, the only Kernberg book that I have is the Narcissism book. And I haven't read that because I've always believed that I didn't like Otto Kernberg. and that comes from because I know that he and Kohut had very different views about narcissism and borderline personality disorder. And so I've always been such a Kohutian that I've always thought Kernberg was like the enemy. And what I found out just this last week is that that's actually not true, and that the experience that you had very specifically on this whole subject of suicidality, I had that experience this week.
Well, it was so very helpful because the week I came home from that seminar is when I got the phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning. And the gal that called was a nurse. And she knew all the, and so I kept quizzing her about, what have you taken? And she said everything that was in the house. And I said, what is in the house?
What's in the house?
What's been prescribed? What do you have? 3 extra strength Tylenol. You were actually in the car with me. We were driving somewhere one time, and I got a phone call. You were driving. I got a phone call, and I'm talking to this person, and you heard me say, put the gun down. You are not going to shoot yourself. Put the gun down. I will see you tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock in my office. And you had to pull over and stop. You were like, how do you do that? How did you know she wasn't going to kill herself on the phone with you? And I said, you have to have a relationship with the client. You have to know. You have to develop an understanding, and you can be wrong. So you have to be careful.
Well, and if you are, you are. I mean, everybody's going to have to live with the fact that sometimes you're going to make mistakes. Now, usually they're not going to be as dire as someone actually pulling the trigger. But nobody is going to be perfect.
No.
And that's just a part of doing business. I mean, if you can't live with what the potential consequences are, then you probably shouldn't do the job.
Yeah, you go in harm's way. Every day that you do the work, you open your door, you're in harm's way.
So let's take our break, and when we come back, I'm going to tell you what I got out of my Kernberg research this week.
All right.
Hey, Brett, if you were going to tell somebody to check out something on the internet to help them with their mental health, what would you tell them?
I'd tell them to listen to Psych with Mike.
Why would you tell them that?
Because it's probably one of the most easily listenable experiences you can have that will give you information that's useful for a whole spectrum of concerns that people have.
I agree, and I have actually been told that by at least a dozen people, several of whom were not married to me, and some of them didn't even know me.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. So when we get that kind of feedback from people, it is so incredibly humbling and overwhelming for me.
It is for both of us.
Yeah. So we really appreciate it, and as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back, and so I don't know if I've said this yet, but the way that this happened is that this Kernberg video showed up in my feed. I looked at it and realized it was from just recently.
Well, that's what you told me this morning
Yeah.
when we got here, but I'm looking at it when you sent it to me, and there's no information in the surround, like why did he send me this? And
Right.
it's just an interview, and I looked up the documentation on the interview. He was being interviewed by some European Congress studying personality disorders.
Right.
So that it was a focus of psychiatrists from all over the world who specialized in the treatment of severe personality disorders.
And admittedly, the video is
since he is
horrible.
the name.
The video
Yeah.
is horrible.
Right.
But what was amazing to me is it's from 2 months ago, and so I was like, oh, Otto Kernberg's alive?
Yeah.
And then I started doing some research, and I found out, yes, he actually is alive, and Kohut isn't, and Adler isn't, and all these other guys aren't, but Otto Kernberg is. And so then I was like, oh, well, maybe I should see if there's some other stuff out there, and then I found out that there's a ton of stuff out there.
Yeah, he's still doing work.
And what I discovered, I actually got caught up in one of his videos on borderline personality disorder, and his conceptualization and his explanation of borderline personality disorder was as transcendent for me as your experience on this suicidality thing. Like, I have never really understood borderline personality disorder. I've always said, I'm not good at that. I don't want to do that. And his explanation of it was so, at least for me, so insightful and so beneficial. I'm like, oh, well, that makes all the sense in the world.
So one of the conversations that we regularly have as we do these podcasts is that there are so many different theoretical understandings that people have offered for consideration. Why are personalities the way they are? Why are people the way they are? How does your personality get broken? Why do you need therapy? How do you help somebody get unbroken if they are broken? What's going on? And as a clinician, you have to develop a worldview that helps you understand what you think is going on in the lives of people that you see.
Right.
And there are parameters that involve the selection of your client base. Where do you live? Do you see mostly Judeo-Christian white people? Do you see mostly addicted people? Do you see mostly South American immigrants? I mean, what do you see? Because there will be a cluster of issues and trends within that population. So you may have expertise based on the extent of your practice that isn't a reflection of what my expertise would be. So, but you have to have a theory of how you understand the way it works. And then you have to see an individual as an individual and listen to what they have to say to try to compare in the background your understanding of this person that you see sitting in the room and all the learnings that you have had about people that look like this, people that believe these things. You know, do you have a religious foundation? Are you a Baptist or a Catholic or a Jew or a Muslim? How, because again, that gives me a better picture of how you might understand and react to things. Then I have to say, my understanding is that most Muslims do this. Do you do this? Do you feel that? How, you know, and if you do, how does that affect you? How does it play out for you? Because my goal in doing therapy with you is to help you get your life to a place where it's working better and is less painful. I don't have a checkbox that I am working towards to say you're fixed, because in some objective criteria that I've given you, I can measure you got a 32% improvement over the last 6 sessions. It's not how it works.
And the reason why this was so significant for me is my initial introduction to borderline personality disorder was working in a mental health facility, and any woman that the nursing staff didn't like was borderline.
She's borderline.
Yeah. Every single one. And I knew that wasn't right. And then I went to graduate school. And graduate school, if you're training to be a primary talk therapist, doesn't really teach psychoanalytic theory in general, but certainly doesn't go into heavy detail on the axis to personality disorders. And so I had a very superficial maybe misunderstanding of borderline personality disorder, but listening to Kernberg talk about both narcissism and borderline as being benign or malignant, so they both have aspects of either one of those things, and that it's really more about the interpretation, the identity diffusion that the client has.
One of the things that you are taught theoretically is that all behaviors act in service to the self.
Yes.
And so the argument that arises from that conversation is, well, if I have borderline personality disorder, if I'm narcissistic, how in the hell is that helpful? How does that serve myself?
If it makes me alone and the only thing I want is to be connected,
Yeah. So again, you come back to what's your theoretical understanding, and then how does that script play out in the life of this individual?
Mm-hmm.
And can you have an impact? Can you make modifications in the way they experience themselves or their script? Can you help them rewrite their script? Do you believe that's even possible?
Right.
So when I was starting 35 years ago, we were pretty aggressively taught, at your level of licensure and training, it's appropriate for you to see Axis 1 issues.
Mm-hmm.
Stay out of Axis 2.
Mm-hmm.
If you get somebody that some other licensed professional has diagnosed as an Axis 2, you can work with them because you know the diagnosis and you can learn some things. But don't go there first.
Mm-hmm.
Go there as an ancillary support to somebody else with more education or a higher degree of licensure, like a psychologist or a psychiatrist who has more knowledge than you have for dealing with more severity.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that Kernberg was talking about in this video that we watched is how he spent so many years working in the hospital dealing with severely damaged individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Not just your ordinary client off the street
Mm-hmm.
who comes in and says, I got fired from my job and my wife left me and I want to go to the bar and get a drink. Life sucks. Maybe I'll kill myself.
Mm-hmm.
And he dealt with more stuff. In the video, one of the things he's talking about is this woman that was in his office who was aggressively rageful in her release of affect within the session.
Mm-hmm.
And then she walked, and to the degree that he was almost physically afraid for his own safety, and she was hospitalized. And she walks out of his office into the hallway, encounters some other staff and patients in the hospital hallway, and she's smiling and cheerful and interacting.
And butter would not melt in her mouth.
Never happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not a thing we see at that severity level in a private office clinical practice in a suburban city.
Right.
So if you want to see that, you almost have to go to a hospital level seriousness.
And I've said forever since the beginning of my career that I think that that is one of the drawbacks of psychological training today is that I grew up in a mental health facility. I mean, I was a teenager and a young adult working 20 years in a locked facility where there were real crazy people.
Yeah.
In my office, I have seen 2 legitimately crazy people in a 25-year career. So
without looking in the mirror.
Without looking in the mirror.
Okay.
And so we don't see
That's
in a typical outpatient therapy practice, we don't see that level of pathology. And so I understand why the graduate schools, kind of downplay that and say, hey, don't worry about this really severe stuff. You're probably not going to run into it, but you might.
You might.
And it's important to know what that looks like. And I think people should.
Well, and they tell you, if you see it, refer it out.
Yeah.
Unless you've gotten specialized training, more additional training and information where you're competent and confident to work with it, refer it out.
Right. But it is also the responsibility of each individual practitioner to decide what is the level of pathology you want to expose yourself to become competent with. There are places that you can go.
You chase your own interest.
Yeah, there are places that you can go to see
on
legitimate
your own countertransference.
Yeah, and now if you don't want to,
my first experience to share with you in the field. When I was 17, I got a job working at the state mental hospital in the maintenance department. So I was sent into the locked criminal ward to do some work and exposed to the people that were locked up in that ward while I was trying to anchor with concrete, with bolts into the concrete, the table that they had dinner on.
So I couldn't pick it up and throw it.
Saw that they were fed from a window with a plastic utensil. And they could tear it out anyway. I mean, eventually their rage was so much. But that was a scary proposition for me. I saw some really strange things. But I also saw some things. These people were hospitalized, many of them against their will, who had some severe behavioral manifestations. And I would go home, and I see similar things in my neighborhood and in my house. So how do I understand that?
Right.
And how come my dad's not locked up over there? How come my mother's not locked up? How come I'm not locked up over there? And am I likely to be?
There, but by the grace of God go I.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So I think that it would probably be better for training programs to do a more comprehensive job of teaching those personality disorders. I don't feel like that I got that to the extent that I wanted it, but I knew that I was missing that because I had been in those situations. I had been around people
But the degree that you were trying to achieve was calculated for a level of service provision within the community that was lower than that degree of severity.
Yeah.
So they were trying to train you to be qualified to go out and do work on this level of functionality. And leave it up to you if you have an interest
to go and get that additional.
To go and get more training. Exactly. And I think that's the only way you can actually do it.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the issues about LPC, licensed professional counselor, compared to a licensed clinical social worker, compared to a psychologist, compared to a psychiatrist, is what is the quality of the training, the extent of the training, and what areas of focus should these people have? And will secondary reimbursement be offered for that? And those are marketing and income-based
I was just going to say, those end up being political questions.
They are.
More than
but
competency questions.
But they're also clinical questions, which you raised the point today. Was I appropriately trained to be able to go out in the community and say, here I am, y'all come, and see who comes in the door?
Right.
Ideally, your training will say, make an assessment, and if it's not in your area of expertise, refer it out.
Yeah.
Whatever that is, whether it's degree of severity or topicality. If you don't know anything about this, if you don't know about eating disorders, but you get a teenage girl that's suffering from eating disorders, and the family's all distressed about that, then you need to refer, if you don't know, or you need to get education in the treatment of eating disorders so that you do know, or both.
And borderline was really, for me, that was the only real diagnosis that I felt like I was not prepared to really treat, and I would always refer that. If I thought somebody was borderline, I would refer that out. Now,
you listen to your secretary?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they will say, oh, this person's
borderline, you need to... but now I feel like that I have a better understanding. I don't know if I'm ready to say to all comers, hey, if you're borderline, come and see me. But I certainly feel more competent in understanding it, and I'm really eager to apply this knowledge to my overarching perception of psychological pathology. I really believe that this whole concept of identity diffusion and how the individual sees themselves and the other as really significant in those kinds of pathologies.
So I don't know if this is appropriate to say or not, but I had 2 or 3 corporate...
I'm full of crap?
No. I had 2 or 3 corporate clients that had HR departments that would sometimes require one of their employees to go for counseling, go for therapy. If they had a client that was suspected to be or known to be an access to disorder, they would require them to come and see me.
Yes.
I had a reputation in town of some expertise, which always surprised me because I would not have gone out and marketed myself as a specialist for dealing with this. But what they told me, these systems, was that they saw more responsive engagement from the individual when they were in therapy with me than they saw when they went other places. So that made me feel good.
And I always referred those people to you, even though I know that you resist having that tag applied.
It's an intense level of commitment that you have to be prepared to make.
But now that you're retired, I have to find other avenues, and so either I have to be willing to do that myself, or I have to find somebody else that I trust as implicitly as I trust you. And like I said, I'm not saying that, I'm going to hang the shingle that says all borderlines welcome, but I do feel as though I have a much more comprehensive understanding of that specific pathology than I did, and it's all because I realized that Otto Kernberg was not dead.
Amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah. So you never know where that stuff is going to come from. I guess if I'm going to leave anybody with a message today, the message would be open to learning opportunities, because you don't know where they're going to come from.
When you were in school, one of the things that you were told, and I know this because I told you, Carl Rogers was known for saying that whenever it seemed as if he had worked through a particular issue in his life, that somebody sent everybody he knew a telegram saying, go talk to Carl about this now. Because suddenly, in the ethos, that topic was prevalent. And what you will acknowledge is that over the course of your personal experience in providing therapy, is that the focus of your client population evolves from within one issue to within another issue to within another issue, if you keep growing in terms of your knowledge base and your professional expertise. So when you acquire a capacity to be appropriately responsive to borderlines, you get a lot of borderlines. If you don't want that,
then don't
develop your capacity to be appropriately responsive to alcoholics, or sex addicts, or food addictions, or some other area, because then you get those clients.
And I even actually have a story about that awareness. The very first time that I know that this happened in my life, I read the word recalcitrant in the newspaper and had no idea what it meant. So I looked it up, because that's what I do.
That's what you do.
I have an extensive section of reference books, which now you use the internets, but back then we used books. And I was probably 22 years old when this happened. And after I looked up that word, I heard it on the radio like 5 times in the next week. And I'm like, have people been using this word all along and I never knew it?
Yeah, they had.
Yeah, they had. I just wasn't in tune to it.
The same thing you experience with clients that'll come in who are having emotional relationship issues, that suddenly every song on the radio is about their story.
Exactly.
But it's the songs that have been playing on the radio, the top 40 forever, but it didn't hit them in the same way until their life circumstances required them to be exposed to that.
And the dictionary definition of recalcitrant is oppositional, usually associated with family. That's the dictionary definition.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's me. Yeah. I've been called recalcitrant all my life. All right.
So if you want to do us a favor, you can go on the interwebs, find us on the YouTubes at Psych with Mike, and subscribe to the show. That is something that is really, really appreciated. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and leave us a comment and a rating. That helps other people find the show, and we really appreciate that also. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.